Hello and welcome to episode 300 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick, here by myself today, as Jason is already enjoying his end-of-year time off. Episode 300. Wow, thank you all for your incredible support for the past 7 years as we've navigated the ups and downs of the aviation industry. Episode 300 just happens to fall on the last week of the year, so it's the perfect time for a clip show. We hope you've had a Merry Christmas and a Happy Hanukkah. We'll be off entirely next week and back with our first new episode of the year on January 10th. This year, we talked with a wide range of industry professionals and learned about the challenges facing the industry as well as successes. And we also had some good old-fashioned fun. In this first look back, all the way to episode 261, we talked with AIN Media Group Editor-in-Chief Matt Thurber to discuss how the aviation industry is reacting to the rising threat of GPS spoofing and jamming. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're now joined by Matt Thurber, who is the editor-in-chief of AIN Media Group, an aviation trade publication. And Matt has been writing and researching about GPS jamming and spoofing for a while now. After last week, where we talked about the new map that we've come out with showing where there's GPS interference and how that affects flight tracking and Flight Radar 24, we wanted to dig deeper, and Matt has graciously joined us to talk about what's happening on the flight deck and what manufacturers and other systems producers are doing to kind of mitigate these things. So Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ian. I appreciate being here.
Thanks for joining, Matt.
So last week we talked about how we are measuring GPS interference and the types of things that we're seeing, whether it's jamming where we just lose the GPS signal from the aircraft coming out with the ADS-B, or whether we're seeing aircraft spoofed and moving to places like aircraft that are flying into Tel Aviv all of a sudden appearing over Beirut, or aircraft in Egyptian airspace appearing over Israel and things like that. So in your reporting, what are you seeing? What are some of the hot spots where we're seeing GPS jamming and spoofing?
Well, definitely over areas where there's a conflict activity that's happening basically all the time, as far as we can see from some of the information that Flight Radar 24 is putting out and others such as gpsjam.org. There's quite a few companies looking at this now that it's become a hot topic. Also, the Baltic area, for some reason, seems to be getting a lot of attention. And it should be noted that these techniques of jamming and spoofing aren't necessarily something that the so-called bad actors might use, but it could be something that the good guys use to compromise the signals of the bad guys.
So what we're talking about is really everyone getting in on the act. And it's not just, it seems that, commercial aviation is just kind of collateral damage in conflict activity.
Exactly. It might even be that nobody's trying to mess up commercial traffic, but as you said, collateral damage. And part of the problem also is that the technology needed to do spoofing, essentially, you can buy a fairly simple piece of hardware and download some software from the internet and off you go.
So let's go over some of the basics here. What is GPS or GNSS jamming, and how is it different than spoofing? And which of the two are we seeing more of these days?
Right. So there is kind of a big difference because jamming requires that you overpower the GPS signal, and that just requires basically overwhelming it and making it unusable. And a lot of these entities that are showing the maps, it's easy to show the results of jamming because it just shows that the signal itself is not reliable.
And GPS jamming, again, isn't exactly a new thing. I think we're seeing it more widespread now, but I think I remember stories from years ago that aircraft or pilots were reporting issues with GPS at Newark Airport because truck drivers driving by on the New Jersey Turnpike were using GPS denial systems to prevent the companies from tracking them, and that impacted aircraft at Newark. And this is years ago, but how is GPS jamming different now than it was 10 years ago when something like that may have happened?
It's probably because the equipment is easier to get, but also we should take note that jamming is often done, for example, in the United States, the military does it as a means of testing their own capabilities. And they're not shy about causing GPS outages for hundreds of miles that affect commercial operators. And luckily, there's a pretty good warning system in place, and we get NOTAMs to let us know where it is and what altitudes will be affected. But you're right, it does seem to be more widespread.
So how is spoofing different than jamming?
So spoofing actually is easier, according to experts, because you only have to have a signal that's the same magnitude as the authentic signal. You don't need to overwhelm it by having a much more powerful signal. And what spoofing does is sends a signal that basically fakes the navigation equipment on the aircraft into thinking the aircraft is in a different position than it actually is. And the problem is that this has the effect of screwing up systems on the aircraft that rely on knowing the position of the aircraft. And it could result in the aircraft actually being flown off course by following that spoofed signal.
So spoofing sounds like it is a much more, I would say, dangerous phenomenon right now than jamming, for sure. It sounds like jamming, suddenly the aircraft just doesn't have its position and the pilots have to deal with that. But spoofing, how does that present to pilots? Do they know there's GPS spoofing? Or can they mitigate it? Or what happens when spoofing might be ongoing?
Yeah, so that's one of the problems that a lot of companies are dealing with right now and trying to figure out the best way to detect what's going on. One of the ways a lot of people are recommending, well, first of all, pilots need to have a mechanism to be aware of areas where jamming and spoofing is happening. And that's one thing that the Flight Radar 24 jamming map can help with, and gpsjam.org. There's other companies working on that as well, like APG just came out with its free Navigard app that uses not only some geofencing to warn people about these areas, but also gives active alerts in flight and monitors the position of the aircraft in relation to known good ground navigation aids, so that in the recent history, there's at least some record of a good known position. But in the air, this is where it gets confusing, but there's a few things that pilots can watch for. If their equipment in the cockpit displays this information, most modern jets, for example, will show you estimated position uncertain, or EPU, on the cockpit displays. And if you see that this is increasing, some reports will say, wow, it just suddenly jumped to 99 nautical miles. Then you know there's a problem. Another clue is change in the aircraft clock's time. And some reports have said that suddenly it changed from a few hours to as much as 12 hours. And one of the first mitigations when this happened, if your airplane allows it, is to deselect GPS inputs to your flight management system so that you don't keep getting the same bad information.
And then, so what happens after we're relying on GPS to navigate the aircraft. We're experiencing either significant jamming or spoofing, and we've deselected the GPS inputs. Now what?
So it depends on the aircraft again, but basically what you need is you need a last known good position, and you need help to navigate from that point. So if your aircraft is capable, most flight management systems are, they can use other navigation inputs to provide a solution. One of the first solutions is from the inertial reference system, which basically can give you fairly accurate navigation for some period of time. Depends on how accurate the whole system is to start with. But you could navigate on the IRS after that for a while, and then hopefully you'll get your GPS back to retain a good position. But most FMSs also can use ground navigation aids like VORs, VOR DME, or DME DME to establish a good position and navigate. But a problem with that is that many countries, including the US, are decommissioning VORs.
I was going to say,
because they're trying to save money. And they figure, well, GPS is great. Let's just go with that.
there was the big push to area navigation and GPS and all of this. And now we're saying, wait, we need those on the ground because GPS might not be available all the time.
Exactly. So the other fallback is if you're in an area with good radar coverage and in contact with air traffic control, you can simply ask the controllers for vectors. And that's what's happening in a lot of these actual cases.
We recently filmed a series of videos with Vidro up in northern Norway, and on a lot of their flights to Kirkenes, which is, I think, 30 kilometers from the Russian border, those flights are often experiencing GPS jamming. And so they've had to basically develop a new system where they just start flying. And then when it happens, it's not really an if anymore, it's a when it happens, they just, let ATC know, okay, we lost GPS, and then ATC starts providing vectors from there. It's not even like an if situation anymore. It's become so prevalent. But it's interesting to see that it's become as simple as just ask ATC. But there are some kind of technical mitigations in the works from avionics manufacturers, are there not?
Oh, sure, absolutely. And in fact, some of them are way ahead of this game. This is nothing new. People have been warning us about it for years. Todd Humphreys, GNSS expert at the University of Texas at Austin's Cockrell School of Engineering, did a TED Talk about this 10 years ago. And it's happening, but let's give an example. Universal Avionics, one of the pioneers in development of flight management systems. I don't know if they did this with the plan for GPS jamming and spoofing, but they designed their FMS with Kalman filtering that first favors GPS, but when the GPS signals are compromised, it automatically goes to DME scanning or triangulation. And the FAA technical standard order for that, they got that in 1991. So they've been working on it for a while. And in response to customer concerns about this, they issued a service letter to their customers explaining what it does and how the FMS is getting its good position. And now, with the latest software update to their FMS, it shows a banner message if GNSS is not reliable and if it's switched to DME. So that's a good example of a really proactive manufacturer.
So that almost sounds like reverse MLAT, where sites like Flight Radar 24 would use MLAT, which is basically triangulation of the aircraft using multiple ADS-B stations to figure out where is the airplane. In this case, are you saying that the airplane is using multiple ground-based stations to figure out where it is and then sends that back out over ADS-B?
Well, no, it's not sending it back out. It's using that for its own flight management system. So it's not sharing it outside the aircraft.
Sadly, it's not sharing it out. So, we've actually had to fall back. One of the things that we're doing is falling back on MLAT because it doesn't matter where the signal's coming from as long as we're getting the signal to enough receivers, we can calculate the position of the aircraft. But it would be great if the aircraft shared that signal back out with us.
That's a really good point. Nobody I've talked to suggested that. That's something interesting. But I checked with Collins Aerospace, Thales, Safran, Honeywell, and they're all well aware of this. And if they don't have a solution right now, some of them do. Some of them are working with other solutions. Another interesting factor is that most avionics manufacturers will allow the airframer to modify the avionics for their particular platform. And an example of this is that Dassault set up the Honeywell avionics in its easy-equipped business jets so that when they're using the inertial reference system inputs, it's not combined in a hybrid fashion with the GPS. So the IRS is not impacted by GPS spoofing, which is also a good example of looking ahead and dealing with this issue. But there's other more advanced technologies coming around. There's one company called Advanced Navigation developing artificial neural network processing for the filtering to detect and mitigate false GNSS signals. There's another company called Sandbox AQ, which is developing a whole new position navigation and timing solution using artificial intelligence, quantum sensors, and the Earth's magnetic field, believe it or not.
Wow.
Okay.
One other interesting area of development, and I think this is going to be big, especially with UAVs and advanced air mobility, is image-based navigation, where,
I was going to ask about this.
yep, it's coming, and there's been a lot of testing, and it's definitely something that I think we'll see more of. In fact, Universal Avionics has done a lot of research in this as well.
So basically what we're talking about is using Google Earth to reference check your position. Is, I think I'm here. Does this look the same to me with my cameras as it does on Google Earth?
Exactly. And big challenge is, what sensors can you use to look through fog or rain or clouds or whatever, because it's not always a clear day out there.
And I'd be real interested to hear how that works at night at 42,000 feet.
Right, exactly. I think it has a lot of potential. Then another interesting idea is, last week I got a demo of SpaceX's Starlink aviation SATCOM, which works pretty well, by the way. And I asked the SpaceX guys on the flight, I said, well, couldn't you use a low Earth satellite network like Starlink for position navigation and timing? And they said, sure, absolutely. And I guarantee you they're doing some research on it.
Interesting. And I think that goes back to the point where something like Starlink or other LEO networks would probably have a much stronger, harder to, let's say, override signal than GPS, which, if you've ever done some research into GPS, you'd be shocked at how low gain the signal is. It's barely there. It's kind of a miracle that it actually works at all, but it doesn't take much to interfere with the GPS signal, whereas I guess something like the frequencies that Starlink or other LEO networks would use is a lot harder to override. Is that basically the thought there?
Yeah, LEO's a lot closer to the Earth, and I don't know what the signal strength is, but I'm pretty sure it's a lot more than GPS, which is thousands and thousands of miles up.
So it kind of sounds like right now, while the industry figures out its next high-tech artificial intelligence, synthetic vision solution to this problem, the solution right now in the here and now is, let's fall back to the tried and true, possibly analog VOR, DME, and even the old iris systems, which the last time I think I even looked at something like that was back in the day. American 767s were famous for appearing all over the map in places they shouldn't have been because they didn't have GPS. They had IRS systems, and those definitely did stray quite a bit from where the aircraft actually was over time. So it's kind of unbelievable that something like that is making its way back in as not a GPS replacement, but certainly an augmentation now.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think it's incumbent on pilots especially to be educated about what's going on, what the risks are, how to mitigate them, but also, a lot of the time you're not flying in the clouds, especially if you're up in the higher altitudes, and you can see a lot of geographic features. And maybe it's time to take a little more interest in what's outside the window, because you can see if you're off course in a lot of cases. Obviously, it's a gross measurement, but I think that it's just one part of the picture of keeping informed about your situation.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to be dealing with after, such promise of how GPS was going to revolutionize navigation and did. But because of how it's built, we end up with some very interesting problems that seem to be spreading as we look at where jamming and spoofing are taking place. Matt Thurber is the editor-in-chief of AIN Media Group, an aviation industry publication, and his excellent article, which we'll put in the show notes, about GPS jamming and spoofing and how different organizations are working to mitigate that, is on AIN Online. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. I really appreciate being invited. And if I can close with one small piece of advice, this was from one of the engineers I spoke to at one of the major business jet OEMs. And he said, look, there's one place you can fall back, and that is buy yourself a portable multi-constellation receiver that connects to your tablet computer. And just, even though it's completely advisory, you're not allowed to use it for navigation, use it to monitor your position, because if one network is being spoofed or jammed, sometimes another constellation will continue working, and that might help you keep track of where you are.
Absolutely. It's funny to me because I had a chat with a pilot not too long ago, and he pulled out his little, they are little now, GPS receiver and stuck it on the dash and plugged it into his iPad and said, look, that's, this is where we are versus where the aircraft's saying we are. And now they match, and that could be different later on. And I was like, oh, okay, this is an interesting way to mitigate the situation. So it's fascinating to see how this continues to develop. Matt, thanks again so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
In this next piece, Chris Lomas sat down with Airbus A321 XLR head of program, Gary O'Donnell, on the occasion of the EASA certification of the aircraft. Gary has been with the XLR since its inception, and we learn what it takes to get an aircraft from the drawing board to the skies.
Gary, first of all, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's going to be really interesting to hear more about the XLR and your experience of leading that program. So you're the head of the A321 XLR program. Firstly, tell me a little bit about what that looks like day to day. What do you actually do?
Okay, yeah, so thanks for the interview. My role really spans everything from the initial spec of the aircraft and supporting the sales, right through to developing the aircraft, developing the industrial system, which is the factories, the jigs, the tools, and supporting the team to develop the entry into service, the customer support areas. And then at the end of the day, I have to make sure that the engineering drawings are delivered to the production sites, so the production sites have the means and the tools to build the aircraft and all the components. And at the end, to be able to get that certified and deliver it to the customers in a good way. So really, it's the full 360 span of everything that's needed to develop a program.
Great. And what does the certification and the entry to service for the XLR mean to you personally, having seen that journey from start to finish?
For me, I've been in a very lucky position because I started the development of the XLR right from day zero. So right from the initial question, if we could do something with the 321 to make it fly longer. So after, for me, 6 years, because we did a study for a year before we launched it, 6 years of my life, I've seen everything from the initial ideas right through to having this aircraft certified. Along the way, and the bit that really motivates me is every week, every meeting, working with teams from all over the world to face difficulties, find solutions to the problems, and have the little wins every week. So the big milestones like first flight, certification, first delivery are very, very important to me and the business. But to be honest, I get more joy and motivation from our dealings every single week with all those people, engineering, suppliers, industrial, certification, everybody, customer support. So it's a huge, huge milestone, and it's sort of the end of a long journey. So it's bittersweet. You're finishing those great relationships and great discussions, but on the other side, you've got the sense of accomplishment of something huge that you've really taken an aircraft development from zero to delivered.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there some of the difficulties you faced. Really, really interested to hear about some of those. So what were some of the challenges that you come across in this process, particularly in terms of, first of all, of achieving the certification and then perhaps going forward to entry to service?
Yeah, so when we launched the aircraft in 2018, we had spent a lot of time looking at all the previous developments that Airbus has done and looked around the way the industry works. So we took a very proactive view on how we launched the aircraft in terms of we had some strong values around collaboration with everyone who needed to be involved. So that needed some sharing, overall transparency, including really early engagement with the authorities and making sure the team were quite balanced, well-being, mental health, physical health. So we used the project to instill a lot of strong values in the way we work, which was fortunate because not so long after that, we had COVID. So we developed this aircraft through COVID. From 1 week to the next, the team disappeared back to their homes right across the globe. So we had to operate for some months in that mode before we could get our offices into a way to accommodate the team safely back in different groups at different times. So that was completely unforeseen, of course, but trying to develop an aircraft and not slow down so much during that period was very, very interesting. Then midway through our development, we had a change in strategy from the certification authorities, the airworthiness authorities, both in America with the FAA and the EASA. So we had to pivot. Whilst we had aircraft in the FAL flight test ready to take off, we had to really pivot and understand how do we now completely adapt, keeping our collaboration, transparency, and the willingness to make sure we do the right thing and absorb that. Then we had the war in Ukraine, which had a big impact to a lot of our businesses, a lot of the factories, because we built several factories as part of the XLR. We had a huge amount of jigs and tools, which are made of steel. So the supply chain got hugely disrupted. So I think we've been tested numerous times on this project. And I think it's a testament to how the team came together at the start with these values and this closeness and this openness that we were able to sort of ride over the top of some of those things with huge support from our very senior management to keep the XLR moving. So any aircraft development is tough. You face numerous technical issues that you have to manage every day. But then with the XLR, we had those global issues on top, which were putting extra pressure on our back. So I think to be at the situation where we're now certified is a huge, huge testament to the way the teams work, as well as their technical skill.
Absolutely. Interesting to hear how those supply chain issues don't just affect the components that go into the aircraft, but the components that build the aircraft as well. Really interesting perspective. And of course, to hear that you're probably, I think, the only manufacturer from start to finish there who's developed a design throughout the pandemic. Really interesting to hear. So the aircraft's now certified. We're probably weeks away from the first flight with Iberia, which we're all very excited about. What will you and the team be focusing on in that time, in the run-up to the first flight?
So I've got 4 key objectives in the way I manage the project. The first one is we have to make sure that everything is fully certified. So we have the certification, the type certification of the aircraft behind us, but we still have a lot of customization mods that the airline need. We have other aspects that we need to certify, a lot of detailed parts after the type certification before EIS. So we still have the certification, and in front of us we have, of course, the Pratt certification, which comes towards the end of the year. So test and cert and engineering is still a very strong activity that we need to continue to polish. The second work stream is making sure that all of the industrial activities are finalized, which means that all the little lessons, all the little fixes, which are not affecting the aircraft, but affects the efficiency of the production system, we have to fix those and seal them in documentation and make sure that the process runs smoothly. And then the third part, which is maybe the biggest part for entry into service, is making sure all of the customer documents are there, the flight manuals, the repair manuals, etc., etc. We have thousands of those documents to make sure we transfer to the airline. And then the fourth one, so for me, the first delivery to Iberia is a big event, but I've got hundreds of aircraft to build, and I've got a number of factories that I need to finish in order to ramp up. So the biggest challenge for me is the ramp up and making sure that all of the engineering learning is done, that all of the manufacturing processes are very mature, that all of the customer documents for all of those future airlines are ready, and then we need to keep the machine moving. So the EIS is a big event, but it probably takes 20% of my focus today because everything else for the future ramp up and the success of all those extra airlines is still a huge amount of work.
So you're always kind of looking for the next step. You're always planning 2 or 3 steps ahead.
At least, yeah. My job is to really, number one, enable and support the team to do the job today, but mostly to look and anticipate the next year, the next 2 years, to make sure that anything that could go wrong, we test it in a test center today, and that could be building physical mock-ups of new things that are coming to make sure that they're very, very mature, and the operators, the production operators, have the chance to play with it before we drop it into the main shop floors. So always looking forward.
So just then, actually a question whilst I think of it on the documentation side of things. You mentioned there's thousands of these documents. First of all, interested, what do those documents actually contain? I know there's a lot there, but what are the kind of the really important things? And are they mostly digital, or do we still have to legally provide a lot of like paper documentation?
So they're all digital from our side, and then it really depends on the airline what they want to receive. So some do take paper. We do work with a lot of paper, and it's one of our ongoing workloads to make sure that we convert everything to digital. So it's not so much the being able to create it digitally, it's already happened for years. It's been able to embed it in an airline, because those documents, if you think maintenance manuals are one of the key documents, which basically, like with a car or anything you buy, any product you buy, you get your instructions of use. Those are the maintenance and the operations manuals are very important. We then have the more technical specialist manuals like the structured repair manual. So if an airline has a problem in service, there needs to be clean documentation of what you can and cannot do. And of course, we support this from our base to make sure that we can support those discussions. There's flight ops manuals. There's the operation of the aircraft from the pilot's perspective. So every single thing that you can consider to run an airline is documented, including the crews, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we have to make sure that for each one of those changes, for each one of those documents, we run a complete set of tests, of dry runs, of simulations to make sure whenever we release those manuals and then base our training on those manuals, that everything works smoothly. So it's a huge, huge document chain.
What kind of simulations are we talking about there in terms of, I guess, preparing for every eventuality when the aircraft is in service? Can you give me an example of one of those simulations might look like and how you run that?
If I give a good example of the maintenance manuals, so in order to have a maintenance manual of something that's fresh on the XLR, like the rear center tank or a different access area, we have to give the maintenance crews direction on the right tool to use. And we need to make sure that those tools are capable of being easily accessible to the fastener or the part that we're trying to fix. We need to make sure that the weights of the part are not too heavy for the maintenance teams to be able to handle and lift and position. So what we do for that, we have a lot of 3D simulations, augmented reality, virtual reality, that we use in our test areas to make sure that before we have built the aircraft, virtually we can go through the ergonomics, the human factors of how to fix the aircraft, so that before we design it, we know it can be maintained. So those simulations are very, very important before we freeze our design, to make sure that in service for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that the maintenance crews can still operate comfortably to do the job.
Fantastic. So having a think about the now more on the passenger side of things, we're talking about putting a bunch of people on an A321 and flying them long haul on an airframe which has traditionally been used for sort of short to medium haul routes. Do you think passengers are going to notice any difference being on that aircraft for that length of time?
I think one of the main differences I think people will see, I get the pleasure of working with most of our airlines, if not all, on the layout that they're putting in the cabin. So when you walk onto a normal single-aisle aircraft, you're expecting to see a pretty standard single-class layout for most people. and you know what you're getting. Whenever we look at the majority of the airlines that we have sold the XLR to, and you see some videos online of American Airlines and what they're offering, we can see the same for Iberia, our first customer. They're going to see a very nice business class, premium economy class, and the economy class that they are used to today, even the same economy class they see on a 330neo. So the one thing we can't do in developing a single aisle aircraft, it's by definition, we can't put two aisles in it. We can't have a wide body with two aisles. The one main difference is compared to a 330, it's a single aisle. But in terms of thermal comfort, the comfort the passengers will see, it's the same as we have on a 330. In terms of the seat, when you're actually sitting in your seat, economy, premium economy, or business, it's the same as you're going to see sitting on a 330. You'll just have less people beside you. In terms of the services that the airlines are planning to offer, it's very similar to a 330. So this is a baby 330, and it's the big sister of a 321LR. So we're really servicing that gap, that transition for airlines, so they can go from a single aisle seamlessly up and touch a 330. So on one side, we don't want the passenger experience to be significantly different than another long-range Airbus aircraft. But on the other side, because it's a single aisle, they'll notice those premium situations on a single aisle aircraft.
So that homogeny between the 330 is really interesting. So essentially, you look at it as you said, the bigger sister of the LR and the baby A330. I think that's a great way of looking at it in terms of the passenger experience. So finally, the XLR is sort of frequently tipped as a game changer in terms of long range, narrow body capability. What impacts do you think the XLR will actually have in practice on the market in the short to mid-term?
For me, as the program manager, I see the XLR as a machine that can be used by airlines for transporting people. So that's really my objective. And what we've tried to do in designing that aircraft is to make it as flexible as possible. I think we'll get maybe three different types of use. We'll get the airlines who are growing new routes, and they're going to try routes into places that are long range that maybe a 321LR cannot reach, but maybe so far they're not fully confident that they have the passenger volume to go for a 330 or a 350. So they're able to take these long range routes on an XLR and then have the growth for bigger volumes in the future. So I think for me, this is one area, and this is going to be very, very big for the XLR. We see a lot of the airlines we're talking to in different regions of the world are talking about opening up routes into areas that they simply cannot fly today because they can't justify it. So this is one area. The second area, I think, will be for some airlines, they'll have the flexibility of a long-range aircraft that in the winter can fly skiing or can fly to specific areas. In the summer, they can pivot and fly to hotter climates. So this flexibility of being able to fly different routes in different seasons is also a big area. And then you have really, and it's about flexibility again, I'm going to say the same word, it's about airlines who know their routes, but they can fly the XLR on a 4-hour journey, or they can fly it on an 11-hour journey. So they have a machine that really can stretch short range, as we do today, right up to long range. And having that machine in your fleet gives you a lot of confidence and a lot of support that it can stand in where something else can't operate, it can stand in. But in itself, it can be a real strong workhorse with multiple turnarounds per day.
Great. So really flexible products overall. Well, look, Gary, it's been fantastic to talk to you. I think we're all really excited to see the aircraft enter service, which we're eagerly anticipating with Iberia very soon. It's been fantastic to talk to you. Gary O'Donnell, head of the A321 XLR program. Thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you, Chris.
And finally, in perhaps the most fun we've had all year with a guest, Max Comer of Airplane Facts with Max joined me for a conversation and a little game. As promised, we are here with a fascinating and incredible conversation, one that I am so excited to have. Welcome to the AvTalk podcast, Max from Airplane Facts with Max.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. You did a pre-interview with my wife just a moment ago because she's the one who found your videos first. and showed me and got me hooked. She's like, you're really going to like this. And it's true. I do really like this. For those that we played a little clip before this conversation to kind of prime everybody, but for those that don't watch your stuff on a regular basis, can you describe what it is you're doing?
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to try to describe, but I'm an aircraft mechanic. So I make videos called Airplane Facts with Max, and I basically compare and contrast the world of aviation maintenance and the world of J.R.R. Tolkien. And I kind of try to clarify some of the glaring differences between airplanes and Lord of the Rings, because people get confused. Sometimes they look at an airplane, but is that from Lord of the Rings? And it's actually not.
There are so many things that I thought were from the Lord of the Rings that are just in fact parts of an airplane.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
But yeah, I kind of talk about how different parts or components of aircraft, and then I kind of talk about Lord of the Rings. So that's kind of what I do, I guess.
How? Just how did this get started? I mean, there's no through line in my mind that goes, this is what somebody should do. And yet, it is incredibly compelling.
Yeah. So when I started making videos about 2 years ago, I've been an aircraft mechanic for quite some time. And I was kind of at a low point in my life, and my wife had recently passed away. And a few months after that, I found myself at work, and I was on Instagram, and I posted a story to my page. And I just was like, this is an airplane tire, and it's different than the tire on your car because it's on an airplane and not a car. And people were like, oh, my friends were like, that's really funny. And I kind of was making like little stories like that just to my friends, and they thought they were funny. So then one day I uploaded those to TikTok, and it just kind of took off on its own from there, because people were like, this is really funny, right? I guess. And then I was rereading Lord of the Rings and getting back into Tolkien. And I was like, I wonder if I could make one of my little airplane facts about Lord of the Rings, but how could I do that? And I started looking at the airplane because I love Lord of the Rings, obviously. And so I was looking at the engine, and I saw the fan blades, and I was like, blades, fan blades, sword blades. I could talk about that. And then it just kind of became its own thing. And after that first Lord of the Rings one, I was like, there's no way I could keep doing Lord of the Rings ones. And then I kept coming up with more ideas, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
How do you keep coming up with new ideas? Are you looking at the airplane first and then going, okay, this is how I can do this? Or is there a scene in one of the books and you're like, okay, I've got it?
So I've kind of come up with a way of thinking about it. Usually I'm at work, and I only make really like 2 to 4 videos a month, maybe. And they're only like a minute long. So I'm not putting out videos that often because it takes me time to kind of think of something. And I'll look at the airplane and I think like, what's Lord of the Rings here? Or I'll see a video online, and then I'll be like, okay, I could talk about that. So I had a video that I did recently that really got a lot of views on it, and it was about speed tape. And
everyone loves to freak out that there's duct tape on their airplane.
Yes. Yeah. And it's one of those things that, as an aviation maintenance professional, where it's like, that's not duct tape. It's not holding anything together. And so then, I'm making the video, and I noticed that the part tape was the strake on the engine cowling. And I was like, okay, well, what's the strake do, right? And it helps redirect airflow over the wings to increase lift. And I was like, redirect. So then I think, Aragorn redirected Sauron's forces in Return of the King when he showed himself in the Palantir, right? So that's kind of how that comes about in my head, I guess.
So that's the idea process. And this is where I am most in awe of these videos. How do you shoot the video? Do you write a script and then work it all out? Or is this just something where you pick up the camera and you're like, all right, I've got an idea, let's go?
It's kind of the second. I have an idea, let's go, right? And I usually film the videos when I'm on my lunch break or on break time, because I don't want anybody else in the background. I don't, obviously don't want the airplanes to be moving or functional at the time, right? And so during lunch, everybody's going to eat their food, and I can just kind of walk out there and take a little quick video on the plane. And I think about what I'm going to say before. So I have an idea of the kind of the video that I'm going to make. And then I'm like, all right, well, let's go do it real fast, and it's just like a quick 1 minute, 1.5 minute video. So it doesn't take long. I don't edit them or anything.
I mean, but that's the crazy part to me, is that you don't edit them, because it's not a paragraph. It's a page of information. And every time I watch them, I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, how do you get all that out? I mean, is it just like whatever I get out in a take is what I get? Or do you give yourself some leeway to do another take?
Oh, I give myself leeway to do another take. Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
It usually takes me a couple before I get out without stumbling or mumbling. But it's a gift I didn't really realize I had, I guess, until I started doing it. And then when I first started, if you went back to my older videos, they're only like 20 or 30 seconds long. And I kind of learned, it's kind of evolved over the years where I like to get more in depth on the aircraft. I used to kind of do my segue. I used to be like, right away, big, this is a part of an airplane. And then I just do the Lord of the Rings tangent. And then as it's kind of grown, I kind of have made it like 50% airplane and 50% Lord of the Rings. And that way I realized I'm actually able to kind of teach people about some of these components that are on aircraft, as well as teach people about Lord of the Rings. And who doesn't like learning about both of those things? They're wonderful.
I mean, I've been just along for the ride. I mean, I know more about the airplane stuff probably than most viewers, but I know much less about the Tolkien stuff than most, maybe, I don't know. But I don't know very much. So it's been interesting to follow along and be like, okay, I don't necessarily see how they can, they're different, but
they're different. They are different.
I'm learning, but it's been a lot of fun.
And, I think in aviation, especially as mechanics, we don't get a lot of representation in the field. As a profession, not a lot of people think about aircraft maintenance unless their flight's getting delayed. Most people don't know what goes into maintaining aircraft. And so I think that there's like a fascination with aviation maintenance and kind of the mechanical side of flying that a lot of people don't get to see very often. And I really enjoy being able to kind of share that into that side of the industry.
Other than having well over 1 million followers across multiple social media platforms, what's been the reaction from people? Is it more, yay, I'm learning about airplanes. Hey, this is really cool. You're talking about Tolkien. Or is it just, I very much enjoy these videos. I find them interesting.
It's been a mix of all three. It's really interesting. There's people that follow me and they'll comment and they'll be like, I don't care about airplanes at all, but I love Lord of the Rings. And then there's people like, I don't care about this Lord of the Rings stuff, but I love airplanes. And for some reason, they both like the way that I deliver stuff. And then there's people that are like, I don't like airplanes or Lord of the Rings, but for some reason, I really like watching your videos. And so it's kind of been that. And the one thing that's really surprised me, because I've been doing this for about 2 years now, is that the reaction that I've received personally has like been overwhelmingly positive for the most part. I remember when my first video kind of started going kind of viral, and I was like, oh no, here comes the trolls. Not like the trolls that the Fellowship encountered in Moria after they went into the Chamber of Marzabul, which was the records chamber that they found Balin's tomb in, but more like the trolls that you see in internet comments. And they never really showed up, and people have been really positive the whole time.
That's fantastic. I mean, I've often said that, aviation's, in my experience, been one of the places where the community is rather tight knit. And I assume that the Tolkien community is probably very similar. So I guess I'm not totally surprised that the reception's been overwhelmingly positive.
Yeah. And it's been so much fun to do. I've learned to really enjoy making the videos. For me, it's low stress. Some weeks I'm like, I don't feel like I didn't make a video last week. I didn't feel like it. I don't really have like a content plan or strategy. I'm just kind of posting when I feel like posting something, when I have an idea, so it's like low stress and really fun. And, it's become like a fun creative outlet for me.
What do your coworkers think?
The older guys usually have no idea that I do it. They don't care. They're like, I don't know what Lord of the Rings is. And some people, most of them, they're like, they think it's pretty cool. They're like, this is awesome, dude. I don't know. I think most people think it's pretty fun. It was really funny. One of the days I was working and one of the guys was like, what are you reading? And I was like, oh, Lord of the Rings. And he's like, oh, I think my wife really likes that. But every time I walk by the TV, they're doing inappropriate stuff on the TV. And I was like, I think you're thinking of Game of Thrones, man. Anyways, sorry.
That's I mean, probably not the case. Yeah, it's a different show, different movies.
Yeah, I think the reception there has been pretty good too. So, it's fun to do.
Is there any place you want to take this, or is it just something that, hey, this is fun, I'm enjoying this, don't mess with a good thing?
It's kind of mostly like I'm just kind of having fun and enjoying it, I don't really have I don't know where I would take it, I don't know, like what do you do? You know, I never, I didn't like set out to be like, I want to build a social media presence. You know, I was just like, I just thought it was fun. I just thought it was fun.
I'm going to make some videos about aircraft facts.
And yeah, the reception and the growth of it has been mind-boggling to me. You know, I really never expected anybody to watch any of these videos.
And yet here you are, millions of views later.
Yeah. And there's been fun things that I got to do with it as a result of the account. And, you know, that I don't take that for granted. You know, I got to go to Comic-Con for the Rings of Power Season 2 events. And I've met some people that are musicians that I really look up to. And I've gotten to hang out with them at their shows and stuff. And that's like been really cool and like a fun, unexpected journey, if you will, that's kind of come about from this thing.
As someone who partially has the job, the reason I'm talking to you now is because I made a map of where you could smell chocolate from a factory in Chicago. I totally understand. So it makes perfect sense to me why people are finding these videos and enjoying them. Have you seen like a particular, have the reaction, so-called reaction videos where like somebody sends something in and then you talk about that? Have people found that more engaging, or is it just kind of across the board? You know, some videos are heavy hitters and then others not so much.
It's kind of random. I don't know how the algorithm works. I can't figure it out. I have noticed that a lot of times the ones where like I stitch a video in after like somebody seeing tape or something like that kind of go off a little bit higher. Or like there was one where somebody's sitting next to like a broken window reveal on the airplane. I'm like, that's not a window.
Right.
Those ones seem to do really well. I think some of the reason is it's kind of takes you all over the place. But I think that I try to, in those videos, like with the window and the speed tape one, I'm hoping that what I can do is kind of ensure to people that like these are safe defects. You know what I mean? Like none of this is jeopardizing safety of flight.
While they look kind of scary, they're cosmetic.
Yeah. Like I totally get why somebody would see, you know, a mechanic putting tape on the engine. Like, why is he putting tape on this? And you're like, well, we can talk about
so many reasons. Yeah.
So many reasons. Like, do you want your flight to have a 4-hour delay because you're waiting for sealant to cure? Or do you want us to just throw some speed tape on it?
I'm all for speed tape any day of the week.
Or like, so, you know, sometimes people are like, oh, I don't, you shouldn't be flying a plane with that much tape on the wing. I'm like, okay, so do you want to wait for the plane to be repainted, or do you want us to put some speed tape on it? Because the painting is going to take a while and you're in like a class 3 maintenance station. You know, there's no reason.
Kind of switching over from just the videos, but like as a mechanic, is there a favorite plane that you really love to work on, or a not favorite plane?
I have 2 answers. One of them's kind of a joke answer, and one of them is a more real answer. But I always tell people my favorite plane is the Q400, the Bombardier Q400.
Okay.
My least favorite plane to work on is also the Bombardier Q400. It's the first plane I ever worked on, and it's very maintenance not friendly. It's not friendly to mechanics. A lot of things on it are hard to work on, and it's sometimes. But since it's the first one I ever worked on, I was like, oh, this is just how planes are. You know, I didn't know any different. And then as I've, you know, grown in my career and started working on different fleet types, I'm like, oh, that thing sucks to work on. But I have so much respect for the Q400. But I think my favorite plane to work on is probably the 777-200.
Why the 200 specifically?
I haven't worked on the 300 very often. But the 300 I do heavy maintenance, so heavy checks, and the 300 is just so much bigger that there's a lot more to do. Like changing the landing gear on a 300 is a little bit more involved than changing the landing gear on a 200. And, you know, I really like the 200. It works really well.
Cool.
The 300 is the engines are a little bit too big. I'm like, this is ridiculous.
And they're really only cool. Getting bigger.
Yeah, it's really cool. I like it. I'm just like, man, I don't want to climb up 4 flights of stairs just to get to the top of the engine pylon. This is wild, dude.
It's a 4-story building just to get to the top of the engine. Yeah, I guess when you think about it like that.
The 777, it's a pretty good plane to work on. I've really enjoyed the 777.
Before I let you go, I thought we could play a game.
Yeah.
I'm going to name an airplane part.
Okay.
And I want to see how that relate, and we can go into as much or as little detail as you want, but I want to see if I can put you on the spot. how it compares and contrasts to Lord of the Rings.
All right, let's try.
All right. The APU.
The APU, auxiliary power unit, that is what, can provide electrical power and pneumatic power on the ground to start or stop the engines, which is a little bit different than the starting of the events in the War of the Ring that are kind of kicked off after Frodo leaves the Shire and begins his journey through the Old Forest, where he meets Tom Bombadil and has to cross through the Barrow Downs before reaching the town of Bree, where he would encounter Strider. And then they would venture across the Midgewater Marsh eventually until Frodo got stabbed on Weathertop by one of the Nazgul. How's that?
Incredible. Because again, not rehearsed, not scripted, just off the cuff. Awesome. How about the flight data recorder?
A flight data recorder. Okay, so the flight data recorder is also known as the black box, which is what records inputs from the flights. And, that is different than maybe the records that were kept in Minas Tirith that Gandalf, who was also known in Gondor as Mithrandir, would go through when he was scouring for Isildur's Count of the Ring after he left the Shire for 17 years.
Perfect. You want to do one more?
Yeah, this is fun.
All right, let's go flaps.
Flaps. The flaps, high lift device, trailing edge of the wings. They're used to increase lift, especially during phases of flight, like takeoff and landing. They're different than the flapping of the wings of the great eagles, which were sent to Middle-earth by the Valar Manwë, who would rescue Gandalf from the peak of Orthanc after he was imprisoned by Sauron, carrying him to Rohan, where he would meet with King Theoden and take the horse Shadowfax to head north.
Perfect. Love it. Max, you are not just an airplane mechanic. You are not just a Tolkien fan, but you've got some other projects that you work on. So tell us where people can find Airplane Facts with Max and some of the other stuff you're doing.
So yeah, Airplane Facts with Max. I have a TikTok. I have a Instagram. You can find me there. I'm also, sometimes I stream games on Twitch when I have some free time after my kids are asleep. So you might see me streaming on Twitch sometimes. Again, that's Airplane Facts with Max there. And then I write and record music under my name, Max Comer. You can find that on Spotify or Apple Music or wherever you listen to music, really. It's not about Lord of the Rings or airplanes. It's
I was listening to some of the stuff before we chatted, and I was enjoying it. And I was like, oh, wait, we need to get ready to go now. We'll put links to all of Max's stuff in the show notes. We've been chatting with Max Comer from Airplane Facts with Max, an airline mechanic with an encyclopedic knowledge of Tolkien's works and just an all-around fascinating human being to chat with. Max, thank you so much for coming on the show. Thank you all so very much for listening, and we're excited to bring you even more great guests, news, analysis, and industry insight in the coming year, including one very special guest not too far in the future. For Jason, myself, and everyone at Flight Radar 24, thank you and happy tracking.